Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Wow, we really have an excellent turnout of attendees. Shows you a lot of interest in value propositions, I'm sure. I'm Dick Orlando, Leverage Point's president, and I am pleased to moderate our session today. I'd like to welcome all of you to another one of our monthly webinars on value-based strategy. Leverage Point provides the only software platform for customer value collaboration. We offer a SaaS-based cloud platform that links all cross-functional team members involved in building and executing a value-based strategy, enhancing the way companies create, communicate, and most important, capture value. You can learn more about us from our website, leveragepoint.com. During the webinar, when you have specific questions or comments, please feel free to enter them in the right-hand panel in the questions section. We'll respond to as many of your questions as we can during the Q&A portion of the webinar and provide answers to all remaining questions via email. Also, please remember to complete a short 15-second survey upon exiting today's webinar. Your answers will help us greatly to improve future webinars, and you'll be eligible to win a free copy of a really exciting new sales book that just came out called Amp Up Your Sales by Andy Paul, CEO of Zero Time Selling. It is now my pleasure to introduce Peyton Marshall, our featured speaker today. Peyton has 30 years of practical business experience with Goldman Sachs and public and private biopharmaceutical and software companies, where he served as a serial CFO and CEO, and has extensive experience in quantitative selling, value selling, in pre-sales and financial services, healthcare, and high technology companies. Peyton has earned his PhD in economics from MIT and served on the economics faculty at Vanderbilt University. Peyton is also CEO and chairman of the board at Leverage Point, and is a very hands-on CEO, and he's been an advisor and coach for many of our world's leading companies in implementing value strategies. So now it's my pleasure to turn the webinar over to Peyton.
Thanks very much, Dick. I'm not sure about the two-handed compliment of being too hands-on, but here I am. So thank you all very much for joining today. We're looking forward in today's webinar to highlight some ways to differentiate value propositions for sales. And in the course of our session, we'll look at how B2B sales conversations benefit from value. We'll look at the 3 key questions you need to ask as you go to design great value propositions. We'll then look at a case study to actually think through the use of value propositions and how they can be used through the sales cycle. And finally, we'll highlight 4 keys to successful sales adoption that we see from some of our great customers at Leverage Point. CEOs are people too. They have their good days, they have their not so good days. And one of the worst days of all that a CEO can have is the day of a bad earnings call. The morning after, by the water cooler or in the analyst reports, the villains are often identified for B2B sales and marketing. The problems most frequently cited, and we hear them over and over again, are long sales cycles, low conversion rates, and unprofitable deals. In trying to understand and deal with those issues, I think the experts have identified a number of challenges that most B2B organizations with substantial products or substantial solutions face. We tend to think of those as the 4 C's, starting with customer connection, commoditization, building customer consensus, and finally, complexity. Let's take a few minutes to look at each of these in turn. Starting with customer connection. Access may or may not be the problem. We all know the things that we hear. A recent survey from the Corporate Executive Board highlighted that prospects are 57% of the way through their buying decision before they ever contact a sales rep. We're all familiar with the issues and challenges of getting through around gatekeepers. The interesting thing, though, is even when reps reach the right people, there's a substantial challenge. A recent survey from Forrester of buyer executives highlighted that sales reps typically are knowledgeable about their own company and their own products, but they really fall down on average when it comes to understanding the customer's issues and where they, as a sales rep, and where their solution can actually help their customer. At the end of the day, only 12% of sales calls add value. That highlights the lack of customer connection. The second C, commoditization. In a survey by the Aberdeen Group of sales executives, field sales, sales operating support, the number one challenge they identified and the number one need they highlighted is a need in the marketing materials and the marketing messaging they have to improve positioning and differentiation. What they said they need are better messages and sales presentations to tell a unique story. The third C, customer consensus. A recent article from the Harvard Business Review highlighted how sales success rates declined dramatically as the number of group members involved in making customer decisions goes up. More and more, the trend is larger buyer teams, worse than that, a need to have consensus or even unanimity when it comes to buyer decisions. The fourth C, we live in a more and more complex world. And that means in B2B, the solutions get more and more complex. They may be suited to the problem, but that complexity is a challenge. And that challenge comes through as the greater complexity means buyer teams don't have the bandwidth, or they won't take the risk to actually make changes. It's interesting to see a recent outcome of the Sales Benchmark Index in a survey of deal outcomes, where they found that for the deals surveyed, wins beat direct competitor losses almost 2-to-1, but no decision from the customer outnumbered losses by more than 4-to-1. The problem here is complexity getting in the way of moving customers to new solutions. Value propositions provide clear answers to simple questions. What are the 3 things that make you better than the competition? And what is it actually worth to your customer? We think of value propositions actually building fluency in a different language, building fluency in the language of the customer. Great value propositions address the 4 C's, starting with complexity, where clear headline results are the starting point. They help with call prep, they help build sales confidence, and they help with clear messaging. Value propositions help in collaboration. The very act of engaging in understanding specifics of a customer, in building them into the value proposition, in modifying and improving is a collaborative process. And in collaborating, in working with different stakeholders, that helps build consensus. Value propositions, by their nature, highlight differentiation. Value drivers as the source of differentiation take on head-on commoditization. Finally, value propositions are also by their nature customer-centric. They're focused on outcomes that are about the customer's success. that makes them inherently collaborative, that makes it easier to get early access and to actually connect with the customer. At the end of the day, value propositions shorten sales cycles and improve margins. The key that we see to great value propositions for sales use is that the right people deliver the right messages to the right audience at the right time. In designing good value propositions, it's very important to look at three key questions before you really get going. The first one is to ask who. Who on your side of the table really constitutes the customer-facing team? Complex solutions usually mean complex teams. The second question is the other side of the table. To whom? Who is your target audience? Start to identify who the stakeholders are and what they care about. The third question is when. When in the sales cycle? What can value do for you early, middle, late of the sales cycle? So let's look at each of those questions in turn, and we'll start with who. In the customer-facing team, of course, we always start with sales reps. Sales reps are biological entities, and we know biological entities tend to be distributed in a bell-shaped curve. But it's important to understand that with most complex solutions, there's an overlay of other customer-facing team members. And thinking about who does what's very important. So typically with a complex solution, there are technical sales, pre-sales type sales people or support people, subject matter experts. And finally, at critical points in deals, an executive is also involved. So when you consider those complex teams, it's important to understand different individuals have different objectives and priorities, but also that they have different aptitudes, roles, and cost. So first, let's look at the sales reps. And what we often see are a distribution in how they cover accounts, ranging from the strategic accounts where the largest amount of money is currently earned, through to the new and emerging accounts that are the strategic accounts of the future, and finally the new accounts with the new account reps. It's interesting to look at strategic accounts because they're often the best supported. And what we often see is that those reps have plenty of resources they can draw on. They don't need in their own right to draw on the value proposition, or they're well coached and well supported. It's the reps in the middle of the bell-shaped curve that often grab hold of value propositions first. And the way they do that is not necessarily the way that complex analytical types would expect. They're grabbing tailored value headlines. They're using those headlines to control the conversation, get the next meeting. And often they're not getting into the complexity of where things come from. They're actually using that complexity to get a further meeting, to engage more people at the customer before they bring other members of their team in. What we then find is the overlay of technical and pre-sales support and experts are often involved at a different stage in the value conversation, at least at first. They're the ones who are first into the in-depth conversations, quantifying differentiation, building trust, managing questions, dealing with objections. And it's very important as we make the transition, as they work collaboratively with the general reps, that there's consistency, that both members, or 3 or 4 members of the team, are staying on message. Platforms help that by facilitating effective teamwork, consistent messaging, data validation and capture. Once a customer has told you something about their business, they expect you and your organization to remember it. Finally, adoption and sales confidence. Second question, to whom? Think about your target audience for B2B value propositions. And of course, There's always at the center, at the bullseye, there's a decision maker. But more and more, decision makers use key recommenders to really manage processes with vendors, to actually take ownership for a successful project and to consider new alternatives. And then surrounding these key people, we have influencers and evaluators. Some people are often both. These are usually where the bulk of users or those benefiting from a service will be sitting. For any major purchase, finance may get involved. And then finally, getting through a deal process, you always see some sign of legal, technology, compliance professionals, not to mention procurement. So if you think about these target stakeholders, you can begin to understand the role of value. Value is persuasive with recommenders and decision makers. But they're not the only ones, because value matters to influencers, evaluators, and finance. And finance are the quantitative evaluators in many companies. Finally, it's important to realize that value may or may not be an objective of procurement and legal and compliance. Some procurement departments are incentivized on overall value, some are more narrowly incentivized. But as a practical matter, sponsorship matters when a deal is getting to a procurement and legal stage. And those professionals do respond to others in their organization. Value also becomes a reason that they make concessions that they might not otherwise make. So it's important to realize value overall affects all these stakeholders. That said, there are specific messages that resonate best with specific stakeholders. Clearly, for legal, technology, and compliance, they have specific risks they worry about. So if your product addresses one of those, they're a good audience. Procurement needs to understand acquisition cost, and acquisition cost is often more complicated than a single price tag. So good communication to them on that matters. With influencers, we often have operating people who care more about cost in their own terms. They may want simple answers, but they'll care about those cost value drivers. The evaluators are often more in a mode of drilling down. That's where you find your digit midgets. They're getting details, and they really want to get into the weeds. That's part of their job description. Finance often cares about all kinds of value, cost, revenue, and risk. They're often part of the audience who asks for ROI. By the time you get to senior decision makers, they may care a little less about cost, but value messages about improving revenues or reducing risk can really resonate with them as an audience. And finally, your key recommender as the circus ringmaster is really working broadly with their colleagues to get value buy-in, adoption, and communication. So that when you look at the channels of communication and how value is understood, you often see relationships within the organization. The third question is when? When in the sales cycle? And almost all complicated solutions tend to have relatively long sales cycles. Different sales cycles and processes differ, but you can think of there being stages that are broadly in common across verticals and across solutions. We hear a few views sometimes expressed as to when do you deploy value. Some start at the very end. We want to deploy value primarily at the negotiation stage with procurement. Others start at the very beginning and say that's the right point, to use it as a diagnostic, as part of a process to even figure out whether to call and whether to begin to qualify an account. And finally, the most frequently heard view is save it for the closing call, save it for the beauty parade meeting. It's interesting that with all these slants, that we actually see some biases and views that are translated into who and how value propositions should be used. One bias is what I call the single stage bias, that value is really only useful at one stage of the sales cycle. Often going along with that is a bias that it's really a subject matter for specialists only. Only my technical sales and subject matter experts are capable of saying anything about value. And the third sort of bias that we hear is a presentation bias, that's really the best way to present value is a step-by-step 20-minute walk through assumptions and slides in a linear format kind of presentation. Our perspective on all this is different, though. It's that value selling can be effective throughout the sales cycle. At a qualification stage, it can help with identifying need and opportunity. As you expand dialogue, value headlines help you get to the key recommender, get that first key meeting, where you then have the opportunity to present differentiation. And if conversations are well managed, that meeting may be different from testing, evaluation, and follow-up conversations. That may be the point where getting into the detail, handling objections, validating claims takes place. So that by the time you're getting to decision time, you've built support from evaluators. You've built support from recommenders. That all helps then going through a procurement and legal process and having that support from the business side and getting to an early conclusion. So great sales organizations deploy value throughout the sales cycle. And to do that, they need to have effective collaboration and teamwork. We like to think of value conversations with a set of stakeholders at a customer as being like peeling the onion. That means different stakeholder messages and objectives along the way, even as at the first point, perhaps only sales reps are involved. They may have broader team involvement through the middle of a sales cycle, and then perhaps fewer at the end. Early on, value can help in demonstrating that your product has potential, so that the contact you found is glad to introduce you and your product to others. Then the whole value conversation can help with demonstrating you actually understand the customer, that you're not going to embarrass them when they sponsor a key meeting. In that meeting, value can be about getting at your key messages of differentiation, but what you're really trying to do is get a team to spend time digging in, that it's worth it to them. So that in the testing and evaluation stage, you're getting at your product's value being real, you're building consensus around, sometimes among risk-averse professionals, that supporting purchase is a good thing, so that there's buy-in at the decision stage that your product will actually add value, so that moving through the T's and C's fast and getting to a deal so that implementation can get underway is a good thing for everyone. Now what that means as you go through the sales cycle is then there's different content that's applicable from the value proposition itself. That early on you're understanding business challenges, perhaps just with a headline. That as you're expanding dialogue, you're understanding the buyer cycle, you're expanding the audience, but it still may be just one key, somewhat tailored slide that you're providing to your audience. At that first key meeting, you never know where it's going to go, and you never know who's going to have what bandwidth. So you're trying to build support, momentum, and commitment. You're trying to control that meeting. And that's a broader audience. Headlines help provide a common ground for everyone, highlighting sources of value and differentiation, and give you a roadmap for how to follow up with different stakeholders. So that in those stakeholder meetings, sometimes separate stakeholder meetings, you can get into the detail, you can build individual trust and support. So that by decision time, you've built consensus, you've built support, And that helps get to a good decision and provide urgency to the process. Let's now look at this with a specific case study of how a value proposition can be used. We're going to take a mythical company called Astrea Solutions that has software for insider trading compliance. The situation is they're a cloud HR software company. Primarily, they look at compliance. And they have new software that we're looking at that helps automate the insider trading compliance processes at companies they cover. They're just beginning to roll this out to a new customer base, regional brokers, bulge bracket firms, and their software really, for the most part, replaces old manual methods of overseeing compliance. The software is good, but getting bandwidth, getting attention is hard. So the customer-facing sales and pre-sales team are looking to get engagement. So consider the rep's problems. Get attention, get the right meeting, expand the customer team, and build consensus. Let's look at how value propositions might be used in that conversation. So we start with an initial contact, where what you're really looking to do is find a potential sponsor, usually with value headlines. Bottom line value, based perhaps only on experience with other customers, benchmark data, case studies. That helps, though, connect early with a customer. It helps cut through complexity and move forward in the sales cycle. What's really interesting when you poll reps is you find most good reps spend more time in call prep than they actually spend in customer meetings. And if you think through the sales cycle, there are many points where call prep really matters. That's where it begins to make sense to really think about how are you going to tailor your value proposition to that specific customer with some specific customer assumptions. And knowing and thinking through that helps you then plan for the right questions in those early engagements. It helps you demonstrate a customer understanding in the dialogue. It helps you collaborate early. Any conversation about a customer's assumptions begins to get you in a direct relationship where they're providing information, where you're showing that you understand their business. So now as you think about the call prep, what also really helps from the value proposition is how clearly it gets directly at where you're different. So you can use a value proposition to look at the value drivers as the source of customer value. Look at further information on how value is actually calculated and derived. That makes a rep more able, readier to highlight differentiation in a meeting, and helps them crystallize clear customer success messages. So that when you're in the meeting, depending on where you want to go and where the customer team wants to go, you can highlight value, you can highlight differentiation. Again, summary value as a headline for a broader team is really a good way to move a meeting forward. Knowing what the value drivers are as sources of customer value start to draw the interest of individual stakeholders. So that you're highlighting your differentiation, combating commoditization early on, you're keeping your meeting on track with the audience, thinking about targeted follow-ups, and you continue to keep it simple. In the follow-up meetings, then it makes more sense to go deep, build trust. That may be a situation where you've got your own pre-sales, your own SMEs involved. And in that process, you may be drilling down through the multiple layers. You may be confirming calculations. All this is about tailoring to customer specifics and making that value proposition more and more specific and better validated as you answer the drill down questions that come from customers. Also in the follow-up, it's a good way to control the diligence conversations, again, with or without your own SMEs involved. It's about building credibility with the data support in your value proposition. It may be about changing specific assumptions to get to their specifics. but it is about validating individual value drivers with the relevant stakeholder or stakeholders so that you're building individual trust and you're actually getting stakeholder-specific validation and buy-in, building consensus. There also are the follow-up conversations that get into questions on timing and payback. And again, if you're ready for those, you can build credibility with your own thoroughness by highlighting payback, highlighting NPV for the finance types. That helps address individual concerns, and it's good to have simple answers in stakeholder language that resonate for the different stakeholders of the customer. Finally, you're in the red zone. You've built some consensus. Customer value then supports the negotiation and speeds closing. With agreed headline value that is there and validated, and is based on analysis and data with customer buy-in. It's customer validated, it's competition beating, it has consensus support, and it's clear, direct, simple. That helps get decisions, that helps shorten sales cycles, increase conversion rates, and do better deals. So the question then is, what's the best way to implement value selling in a B2B organization? And it won't surprise you that great content is a good start. Good tool and content training always help. But what we see over and over is that adoption of value selling needs strong support. We'd highlight 4 keys to sales adoption. First, identify and support value rock stars. It's interesting where you find value rock stars. There are many places in an organization. Sometimes it's a product manager with sales background or experience. Often your pre-sales, technical sales, SMEs, or business development people have an aptitude and they understand the technicals in a way that make them good at translating into value, translating the technical things they understand into dollars, euros, or pounds. Some organizations seed this effort with value experts or engineers or value managers. And of course, the key here is how do you get leverage out of those value engineers? Because you want to get this going on other places in the organization. And then the hidden gem are salespeople who've actually been selling value their own way all along. If you can learn from them and get scale based on what they've already learned and have been doing, that's huge. Now you might think these are the people who need the least help. But as a matter of successful rollouts, it's really important to spend the most attention early on with them. Provide them with tool tutorials, brainstorms, get them to buy into a tool change if they're used to old ways. Support them with customer data. Help by providing follow-up materials, slides, answering questions, responding, most importantly, responding to their feedback to improve what you already have. Make sure they get plenty of the credit and plenty of the PR when things go well. By getting their buy-in, that helps accelerate change, it helps with early success, and it also gives people driving value into an organization insights into best practices. The second key to sales adoption, celebrate success, communicate war stories. One deal closed with value selling is a big deal. Make sure you celebrate it. That motivates, that helps build confidence. It also highlights the tangible benefit, going from the concept of value selling to actual deals, which translates into commissions. Those are the things that help value propositions go viral. But it's important to do more than just celebrating success. Find the war stories embedded in that success and communicate them. That not only reinforces motivation, but it helps provide concrete insights for reps into when do I apply value, How do I have a good value conversation? And how do I get resources and support? Those war stories are worth way more than a set of abstract skills on a whiteboard. Key number 3, build senior sponsorship. These are all organizations where tone comes from the top, and it's amazing how many CFOs and CEOs present to their shareholders that they care about customer value. It's important internally that they actually be fluent in more specifics of how you create customer value. They're using those in their direct conversations can really matter. What's more important as they become fluent is their ability to move the organization in the right direction, whether it's a CFO intro to a webinar with high fives to a team who completed a big deal based on value, or whether it's an EVP of commercial operations doing a sales conference kickoff with a strong value-selling war story or two. And finally, it never hurts to have some internal recognition, ways that the latest value rock star can be highlighted for joining that club. Finally, key number 4, take an agile approach. You know, there's a funny thing where when a marketing team has been working, really building a great story, a set of messages, a value proposition to go with it, where they get to the end, they breathe a sigh of relief, and they think of what they've created as art for the ages. Well, value propositions are never finished works of art. Take an agile approach. Deploy fast. Don't delay for perfection, because you will learn a lot from those initial deployments. Use those early versions to generate feedback. Then take that feedback and continually modify tools and content to increase adoption. This really is all about team. Product management, pricing, pre-sales, sales ops, sales support, and the sales rep. And by good teamwork, you can win the next game. So that's really all we have time for today. Later this year, we'll look at a webinar that goes into a little more depth on customer value and sales conversations, where what we like to do is get into a few more specifics on good design ideas for how to have consistent sales team use. And what does a sales team, and what do pre-sales teams actually need? But that's all we can cover up front today. So just remember, successful value propositions are about the right people delivering the right messages to the right audience at the right time. And now, glad to take some questions. Dick?
Thank you very much, Peyton. There were some great insights there. We have several questions that came in during the webinar. However, there is still time to enter your question into the panel of your screen and qualify to receive Andy's free book. All attendees, by the way, will receive a copy of all the slides and audio of today's webinar sometime later this week. While you are entering the questions, just 90 seconds about Leverage Point. It's a cloud world. Something like 60% of organizations today have meaningful applications on the cloud because their customers and their sales reps demand it. Our cloud platform is easily adoptable by sales, marketing, and pre-sale support via an intuitive user interface to minimize training time. A dynamic web-based value proposition is both more flexible and more effective than the traditional static PowerPoint deck. Now, sales teams can access and deploy customer-centric, tailored value propositions with strong value headlines that engage audiences throughout the sales process, where key data is easily changed by sales for customer specifics and displayed with consistent graphics and messages. Plus, immediate access to information with the ability to drill down into quantified value as appropriate. Our customers experience building trust in sales teams with their prospects and customers as they validate an offering's value through collaborative and consistent sales conversations with one-click access to your company information and multimedia marketing collateral. What I'd like to do now is start off with some questions, and we have some great questions to start off with. And again, just a quick reminder about the webinar survey so you get an opportunity to win Andy's great book. So with that, Peyton, we're going to start you off, I think, here with the one we usually get when we present value propositions. And it says, at the beginning of the sales process, I may not have the exact data returning to my customer. Do I need to wait for this exact data before presenting the value proposition?
Thanks, Dick. That's a great question, and I think we see it all the time. You know, it's interesting how far you can go in a conversation with very simple, relatively easy to find data. It starts with public data. Sometimes it's just one or two customer interviews can get you the essentials. One case study or an anecdote can be a good basis. And what we see over and over is, with that as a starting point, value propositions evolve. They get the benefit of the early conversations in getting to new information, new data. Again, if you take an agile approach, you can adapt to that new information. Sometimes you discover new value drivers. And the process of having the conversation itself with early customers refines the data that's applicable to them. So perfect data is not at all necessary. Get started fast and you'll learn a lot.
Okay, the next question. We have hundreds of sales reps in the field. Where do you suggest we start in testing value propositions for sales?
Good question. When you look at organizations, everyone is a little bit different. But you find that there are a number of natural starting points. The first starting point to think about is the product or products you focus on. You want to focus on something that matters, something that's important, something that'll move the dial, because that early success from something important helps build momentum. Second, which team members? You don't have to start with a whole sales force. You may find it's natural to start with a pre-sales group, and that their presenting in front of a customer starts to make value more contagious. We often find that one or two pre-sales type war stories then rolled out to groups of customer reps. It may be existing account reps, it may be new reps, then can build momentum in specific groups. And again, the social elements of here really matter. So what we see over and over is it's most important that you find some early steps that are relatively simple steps and get success.
Thank you. I just received another question. Let's see, let me paraphrase it. I didn't see much about the role of marketing unless you inferred it via product management. Marketing is responsible for the value prop in my organization. Can you tell me a little bit about more how marketing can be involved with this?
Good question. And we may have used terms that are a little too specific. What we see in most organizations is that the creation and continuous improvement of value propositions is usually coming not from the sales organization, but it's coming from some combination of marketing and product management. And it all depends on roles and aptitudes. But if you look at the combination of product management and marketing, they're critical in setting up the initial value proposition, in getting good starting points in terms of quantified value, in disseminating that, and then continuing to get feedback and improvement. So I think we view marketing, product management, sometimes even pricing professionals working hand in hand really at the center in many cases with those customer-facing teams, sometimes getting involved directly with customers themselves.
Thank you. This is one I think I'll grab because I get this all the time when I go out and do sales training to our large B2B enterprises. Why wouldn't I just save my value proposition for the end discussion with procurement where the discount decision occurs? That's pretty straight question. And the analogy I have is think about world sporting events like a World Cup match, or think of the NCAA basketball tournament in the United States that just concluded. If you keep your best tool or your best players for the last game, you'll probably not get there. And as Peyton said very well, these are long sales cycles, so it's really important that value be communicated as early on in the sales cycle as possible, so your reps can create the confidence that you're there collaborating with them. And different people throughout the sales cycle have different roles. So it's really critical that your value proposition be tailored for that client, because at the beginning of a sales call, it's why should we consider you as a solution? And the answer to that is always because we have a value proposition we present to other customers that have saved them $5 million that are in your field. And I'd like to have you listen to that. And sort of as you go in the middle, it's why should I consider your value why should I consider you versus the competition? And that's maybe a different value proposition. It's about how you can save more money with yourself, your offering versus your competitive offering. But what's really hidden is that operational decision maker question that's always relevant is why should I choose you? And that's the 2 or 3 reasons in the value proposition that'll get the decision makers' attention there. All right? So once you go into procurement, you hopefully have a champion or you have an advocate that really wants your solution. So when you go into procurement, you are talking value. And this isn't about 0 discount versus a lot of discount. It's about potentially saving 1, 2, or 3 points of your discount or improving your margin when you do speak with procurement, because you know you have a series of folks that you've dealt with in this long sales cycle that understand the value to them. Okay, I think we have time for, it looks like another one or 2 questions. What, in your experience, do great organizations do to improve their value selling efforts?
Thanks, Dick. I hope we addressed that in some of the slides at the end of the presentation, where we were highlighting the need to have great content, great training, but then along with that, really run a process that's going to motivate sales, that's going to show them success and leverage that success to make value propositions go viral. So the great organizations that we see, yes, they cultivate their rock stars. Yes, they celebrate success. They have strong senior sponsorship and senior voices. And they keep learning. They keep using everything that they are learning to continuously improve both their content and how they provide that content to their reps and pre-sales people.
Okay, a question just came in. Can you advise how the value approach can get you in front of the right person or decision maker within your customer's organization? You know, customer value is an interesting way that we see sales reps early in the sales cycle moving things along. And that value headline early on, that initial resistance from a customer to buy in, and then that almost implicit, it's a bargain, but it's a collaborative bargain, which is, I'd love to get one of my colleagues who's an expert in this together with you and other members of the team to really get into how we've seen that experience develop in other circumstances. So that value headline becomes the basis for a trade to get the right meeting and to get the next meeting.
and to stage things so that you really can get a good conversation going and build stakeholder consensus.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. How can I use a value proposition to solicit key information from the customer, such as their current cost of their existing solution or competitive offering? Let me start this one off, and Peyton may want to add some. There's only three ways. One, depend on your internal research and marketing information to give you that information. Two, ask them, but you're probably not going to get a straight answer. Or three, by utilizing a value proposition and making assumptions such as based on 4,000 transactions a day, it's going to cost you this, and they come back and say, well, we really have 10,000 transactions per day. So you're creating a collaborative environment where you actually are now starting to get some information that you didn't get before, and with the cloud solution, you can change that and see the immediate impact. When it comes to competitive offering, again, your marketing departments generally have very good competitive information and analysis departments and information. So make a guess at it. But pricing changes, especially when you're in a sales cycle, all along. But the customer will be impressed when you do deal with the issue and say, based on your current solution or the competitive solution, we believe that this is what your cost is. They'll tell you if you're high or if you're low. So, and what are you doing all along? You're really engaging the clients in a collaborative discussion about the data, and you're honing your data closer and closer. Customers really enjoy that collaboration side of it, but they'll tend to answer an open-ended question versus a closed-ended, a yes-no question. So we're hearing back and forth. This is really helping me gather information dynamically during the sales cycle.
I think you've said it very well, Dick. Maybe to amplify, you identified door number 2, which is ask, and door number 3, which is lead with positive statements and information. Door number 2 works pretty well for a couple questions. What we've seen in some not so well-designed value propositions is instead of 2 or 3 questions, the 20 questions before you get into a value conversation. So what works far better, I think, is a mix of questions and some positive statements based on other experience. And that's a good combination of doors number 2 and 3 together, where leading with that other information, leading with your initial analysis and the assumptions and the experience you have elsewhere is really a good way to then make sure you listen, but get the customer talking about what concerns them and the specifics of their business so that you can really modify and connect.
Thank you, Peyton, and thank you all for attending. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for questions today, but please feel free to reach out to Peyton directly with any additional questions. Thank you, Peyton, and everyone for attending today. Again, please don't miss your chance to win this really exciting book by Andy Paul called Amp Up Your Sales. It's a great read. Just complete the short survey as you exit today. Thanks, everyone, for watching.